I don't think I can, but yeah,
No,
it's
no
a
baby
good
noises yet.
it's a good way to start the show though. If there's baby noises in the background.
She's crying.
Oh no.
Did okay, baby.
Yeah.
All right. Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to Hot Boys Talk Show.
With this,
I'm Tamsin Elliott, and
I'm
he's
Daniel.
Ellis, and we're joined by the wonderful composer Carolyn Chen today.
Hi, I'm Carolyn.
Yeah. Oh, so Carolyn's baby might be heard in the background,
Yeah.
and sounds like they want to give a their own introduction. But maybe you could, in her stead, give an introduction. But no, but you know, every week we share or we ask our guests to share like what they do and how they would describe what they do. So maybe you could start off just, what does Carolyn Chen do?
I make music. I guess professionally, yeah. I make music with people. Some of them are people who play traditional instruments, and sometimes it's people who don't necessarily have instruments, playing listening games or moving around in a space, listening to a space or listening to each other in ways that kind of relate to traditional music listening.
Yeah, and your background, I guess, was like going to school for not just music, right? There's maybe some other things that led to you doing music, or were all your degrees in music? I forget.
I did a bachelor's in music with a concentration in piano performance, and then a master's in modern thought and literature. But it and then a PhD in composition. But it took me a while to decide that I might do music. I mean, I didn't start composing until like I don't know, the middle of my undergrad. So I was supposed to be an electrical engineer. So it just kind of like moved gradually, fuzzier and fuzzier, and like, you know, less financially promising and less. So I studied like other stuff. I did a lot of hard sciences, and I mean, actually at Stanford, I took classes in sound art and like creative writing. At UCSD, I did a lot of like dance, so and poetry and stuff. So it all helped.
What style of dance? I'm just curious. Was it?
I took everything that I could. Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not good at it because I started in graduate school.
Sure. Yeah.
But I did contemporary dance the most. But I also I did ballet, I did jazz. The West African dance class was the very best one. I did hip hop, but then the instructor that was there kind of left. But anyway.
Yeah, yeah. That's
there's a contact improv.
Whoa, that's cool.
Yeah, I took a contact improv class in undergrad.
That's
and
fun.
Yeah.
It is so much. I just feel like it's such a conceptually rich practice for our listeners. It's a form of largely partnering improv where it's sort of based around the ideas of I guess weight sharing and consent. That's I think how I would describe it. So it's a lot of learning about how to respond to someone else's body and their weight, and to sort of read from them. It can be fascinatingly beautiful and very acrobatic, but it can also just be literally like sitting back to back with someone, you know, and breathing. So yeah, it can be very relaxing. I was gonna ask actually, and you know, having taken a lot of other, you know, also studied a lot of other things myself, what was your the class that you felt most affected your musical practice that you didn't expect it to, or musical thought?
That's a good question. You know, I mean, I took this is not that unexpected from the title, but I took Paul DeMarinis' sound art class, and at the time, I just remember he was like very laid back about the structure, and he just kind of showed us stuff and then had us work on things, but it felt very like hands off, like it was just like everybody was doing their thing, and there was like not a lot of management or micromanagement or anything. And I remember looking at the stuff that he showed us and thinking, like, this is so bizarre. Like, what is going on? He had these videos of Jerry Hunt with, like, objects dangling above him and, like, kind of crouched in a fetal position staring at them. Just, he brought in the strangest things. And then a year later, I realized, like, oh, those are all my favorite pieces now. And in some way, like, also my piano teacher, Tom Schultz, which, I mean, of course it's your instrument, but I didn't really think about going into music, and I had just always done piano, and I just wanted it to continue being a part of my life. I definitely had no intention of going into performance professionally. And also he was into contemporary music, and I was not when I signed up to work with him. I just thought everything was really weird, and I didn't really get it. But then, like, after I graduated, I realized, like, oh, those are the pieces that somehow are the backbone, feel like the spiritual underpinning of what I do, with this music that he introduced me to, that at the time I sort of felt out of my depth. Yeah.
I think this is sort of a good turning point to listen to a bit of your piece, Is the Scream. Speaking of sound art and being, pulled into sound. Would you like to sort of describe a bit what this piece is?
Yeah. It started out as an essay trying to describe what I was trying to do in an instrumental piece. So I wrote like a large chamber ensemble piece based on Kanye West's Monster and Luigi Nono's Woe to Cold Monsters. The instrumentation is obviously more like the Nono, and the music also based on the resources. But when I was trying to make that piece, I was trying to make the structure very clear, and to me, I think I broke it down into the first third would be like the sound in the scream and kind of exploring the grain of that scream that starts out Kanye West Monster. And then the second part would be the feeling in the scream. And I thought, oh, what is the feeling? The scream slowed down. It's like crying. So there's a recording of me crying, and then the instruments are trying to respond to that. And then the third part was like the singing quality of the scream. So I played my teacher at the time, Katarina Rosenberger, the recording once it was finished. And then I explained her the structure, and she said, oh, that's great, but none of that is clear. You should just say it. And then years and years later, I had to do a solo set at this festival. So I thought, oh, I'll try explaining it.
Is that this performance here that we're going to be looking at?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to hear a little bit at the beginning of this.
This is a scream. I didn't do it. Somebody else did. It's from the intro of Kanye West's Monster, which was a song written in 2010 by Kanye West, Jay-Z, Rick Ross, Nicki Minaj, Justin Vernon, and Daniel Linus, and produced by Kanye West, Mike Dean, and Plain Pat. Wikipedia says that Justin Vernon is the one who sang a distorted vocal roar that begins the song. I heard it as a scream. I didn't scream, but when I first heard the scream, I wanted to hear it again. And again. again. I wanted to hold it in my hand and turn it this way and that, to prod it and spread it apart to see what's inside. Because it sounds to me like there are all these glistening little parts hiding in there, moving inside the larger sound. They're too enmeshed to pick out in real time in only one listen, so I wanted to hear it over and over.
Such a crazy noise. So that's, unfortunately the first little bit, and there's a much larger sort of thought and emotional arc through this essay solo version, and there's a lot of comedy in this piece and other pieces that I've heard of yours that are not sort of like stand up, but like where you clarify in the beginning, like, I didn't make this scream. Like, that's a very funny way to put it. And I was wondering, so what role for you, what conversations have you had with yourself about the role of humor in your work, which usually is sort of touching at things that are much deeper or more disturbing or unsettling than the lightness of a lot of your humor.
Wow, that's deep. I think I didn't really think explicitly about humor until somebody pointed it out in the middle of graduate school. I think, I don't know if I think explicitly about it now or for that piece. I think it's just, to me, the way that humor works seems intrinsically tied to timing and musical timing and waiting and expectation and the kind of rhythm of expectation that's set up. And maybe also, in a way, the humor can be about tangents and sort of surprising connections. And to me, that's also one of the kind of basic working methods that I have. And so I think it's sort of dealing in very it's close material, or closely related material, but I don't know that I guess with words, I don't know that I would specifically say I'm trying to get a laugh here, or to make a joke, because I respect, I'm interested in watching stand-up comedy, and it's fascinating to me the way that they work, but I definitely don't have that experience or kind of skill set. But I think, I do think with things like rhythm or something, or the way that orchestration is set up, I would choose the one that's funnier. But it's never going to be a laugh out loud funny.
I definitely lolled watching this.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I remember seeing the piece live. I think there's a video out there of the version I saw at ArtShare. But I remember, that one thing I found striking about it is really disarming, like that you kind of let your guard down and laugh. And I remember at that show specifically, there was a point where someone from the audience came up to, like, I think it was Stephanie Aston who came up and was like sort of talking through how you might try to scream, like, or giving a masterclass on screaming suddenly. And and then at the end, I think you and her asked everyone to scream together, to try it together. And it struck me that, I don't know, that your piece opened up that space, and that perhaps something about the delivery method, like, has this openness or possibility to it that could lead to something that's very, maybe not planned, you know? Like, I don't think you planned that with Stephanie, but anyway, I was wondering, like, how the casual or the kind of, like, openness works in your pieces, because it feels like that's especially with this one, it's built into the work that there should be this sense of, I'm not on a stage, or, you know, we're discussing, we're talking together.
Yeah, that's a nice way of phrasing it. I think a lot of my music is, it comes out of the idea that there's music everywhere, or, you know, the stuff that I'm interested in sort of assumes that there's musical possibility everywhere and within every person. And it is something that I do believe, and, you know, I think it's unfortunate in our culture that we tend to assign musical responsibility and talent, the idea of talent, to particular individuals, and it's not as equitably distributed in terms of who gets to participate. I think it's, sorry, I missed the question.
Oh, just, how you maybe build in, like, casualness or openness in the works.
Casualness is a neat way of putting it, because I think, I think people do sometimes categorize music as being kind of open, if it's not necessarily for a fixed instrumentation, if it doesn't necessarily require a particular skill set, or a skill set that can be assumed of a general public. And I think a lot of my music does fall in that kind of tradition, with, like, you know, Christian Wolf has these pieces that are for kind of any kinds of performers, or some Fluxus pieces are very open. But casualness is also a nice angle on it, I guess, because what it's all about is kind of celebrating amateur music making, right? And so maybe there's a part of me that also identifies with that, because I am, maybe all of us in this genre are like necessarily amateur because we do it for love, right? And it's not necessarily about the specialized skills that are learned in avenues of higher education or elsewhere. So I think somebody once described this to me as, like, you kind of intentionally sabotage things when it seems like they're going well, and it could get past, you know, like, you could kind of believe, oh yeah, this is like a well put together thing, and there's something in you that, like, is just like wants to mess it up. But maybe casualness is a positive spin on that kind of impulse. Imposter syndrome.
Right.
The way that you were talking about this just now reminded me of portions in this really beautiful small essay that you wrote. When it's 2018, it's an essay called "Parts to Sing Empty," where you talk about various pieces and how you approach them, and your supermarket piece. And one of my, there's this great line: I dispersed pieces throughout the store, overlapping runtimes, flowing without teleology as many small, divisible parts, each full of their own motion, singing the aisles from moving carts, tuning tomato sauces by sugar content, tuning to freezer hum, assembling monochrome carts. Through these actions, I sought to acknowledge the supermarket's undercover identity as a sublime nature in space for art. Which is, I mean, and you have references to Leibniz and Deleuze at the beginning of that paragraph, and I find it very interesting, this sort of line that you walk between this sort of, like, you know, amateur, but also, you know, you seem highly cued in onto sort of the sort of careful picking apart process that theory, like critical theory, can provide, which can so easily become, you know, like can transport you to a sort of elite position, you know, from a, you know, art, like being an artist and a thinker, you know, and I sort of wonder, like, how, what's your sort of relationship with this? What's your relationship with critical theory at this point?
At this point, we're like Facebook friends. You know, it's one of your. It's very distant. It's a very distant relationship. I don't really post on Facebook very much anymore. I think it was definitely valuable when I was a student to run into a lot of these things and to have it sort of color to articulate different ways of seeing the world, and kind of breaking down things like power or stuff like that. But I mean, realistically, what I'm reading, honestly, right now is like how to get your baby to sleep at night. That's 90% of what I Google. So it's still there, right? And I think it's still part of the stuff that really resonated will continue to be there. And, you know, I hope maybe someday when I'm getting more sleep, I might turn back to some of these texts. But yeah.
Yeah. Like, sleep deprived reading of critical theory probably is something. But difficult.
Yeah, so that something is, you know, well, I always have I've gotten to the end of the page and, you know, there's nothing in here, you know. Yeah. And I do that with a regular amount of sleep, so.
Yeah, but I guess it's interesting because I think something about your work, maybe, again, like the word casual comes up for me, but like it sort of covertly does speak to power by like avoiding that, or like refusing to like take the posture of a composer in the way that we're used to, of like in the video of This Is a Scream, and maybe we can look at some other pieces too. I think like in the work Private Ocean, you do the same thing of kind of just avoiding the type of here's the story and like I'm gonna tell it to you flat out and you have no agency in the process, and then like breaking up this kind of like wall of performance that's normally put up of like I'm the composer and I present this thing to you that's like polished and finished, and instead I feel like it's inviting us to like study little, I was saying earlier with Tamsin, like delightful tangents that make you want to study something, that a tiny little morsel in the piece more, yeah, so in that way, I feel like the theory, maybe it's not from critical theory, but this kind of critical posture toward a way of like imbibing music, you know, like instead maybe we can have this very open to possibility moment together instead of like a sending or forcing you to think something or sending you something specific. So I don't know if we want to look at Private Ocean or if we should look at another piece.
Yeah, let's pull up a little bit of Private Ocean. This seems to be one of the only pieces I could find of yours from the past year. Could you talk a bit about what went into making it? To realize it's also a collaboration.
Yeah, it's sort of started with Chen Torrance, percussionist in Norway, proposed doing a video piece, and I worked with her a few times before, and so I was kind of excited just to be connected to somebody, to you know, had to have a specific goal in a time where things are kind of disorienting, and so it's the story of Jonah and the whale told from three voices. One is my own, and one is Jen's, and one is my mother-in-law, Edith Alwell. And so she's telling the kind of the biblical version of the story literally, and then she has a story about a fall. Jen has a story about spending a month on a Norwegian sailboat with some artists. And she also has a section at the end where she's reconstructing this painting of Jonah and the whale. And my stories are one from the perspective of a pregnant whale, and then two from my own perspective as a person who is a new parent, kind of thinking about this new being and the bubble that it's created kind of around the new being.
Yeah. We're going to watch a small portion about tying knots.
So this is Jen.
We learned 4 knots on the boat. First, Båtmannsknop, or square knot, used to reef the sail or make the sail smaller, usually because it was too windy and it felt like the boat might tip over after a big gust. Second, Polestick, or bowline knot. I think it's used when a knot quickly needs to be undone. Third, dobbelt holstick, or double half-hitch, used to tie the rope tightly to other things, like to a ring or a pole. We used this to tie down a large canvas to the sides of the boat to make a shelter for the evenings, a kind of boat-sized tent. Fourth, åttetallsknop, or the figure 8 knot. I actually don't remember using this one. Perhaps it was used when people couldn't stand being in the tent anymore and took their hammock between 2 trees and slept on land. I never slept on land.
I love the marimba choice in this piece.
Yeah, in that clip, it's interesting. I liked what you said about like sabotaging your own pieces. But I found so what I'm thinking of is the moment where we see what I think is like either your hand or Tal's hand like holding, yeah, the your baby's hand, which, I think it's used when a knot quickly needs to be undone. So it like suddenly throws me into a new space, like from this kind of like maybe didactic or like a, informative, like here's these things, and then suddenly I'm trying to like map knots to baby's hands or like holding a child, and these little like flips that happen in the piece I think are really special. And I wonder just what your thought is on like, we were even having a hard time like picking what moments to show, because in a way the arc of the piece is not exactly narrative, and almost like to cut a little piece out really in some way maybe destroys the whole experience. But I wonder what your connection is to narrative or like threads or storytelling, or if those are different things. And but just like what's your relationship to narrative more specifically?
I think it's something that I'm trying to learn more about. I think most of my formal training is in a non-narrative form. And so it's sort of exciting to me. I think when I was a student, form was always like the part of this educational aspect of trying to make music that was not a natural strong suit. Like everybody comes in with a diagram of their beautiful piece, and the picture of how it looks, and it was just like never how I was driven. And I did it because I was in school, but it's not a natural part of how I hear music. I mean, I kind of just listen moment to moment. And I sort of made my peace with that, and I think I'm fine with the form that results from not necessarily pre-planning everything. But narrative is appealing to me in a way because of its transparency, or just literally saying, this is what's happening. Do you know that the recording of North American frogs, where it's just like, rah, and then this is this kind of frog, and then it's like, rah, 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 this is this kind of frog, and it's the best form because it tells you can never get lost, right? And I think there's something that really appeals to me about having like a voice there, that a casual voice that even if they're not necessarily saying exactly what will happen next or how it relates to what happened earlier, it has that feeling that it might, and that it's sort of like extending a hand, like you're in on, there's no joke that you're not a part of. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, it feels like the way that often like text and narration shows up in the piece. It feels like having like handholds, like you can pull yourself to the next point as you take in all the things that are coming in the sort of less linguistic areas of your senses. One thing that I really like in the usage of the dried seaweed in this piece is like in the very beginning of that clip. It was like we learned 4 knots, I think, and you have these 4 little clumps that almost look like they could be the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, but they aren't. And there's a lot of usage of these sort of proximal, like the little clumps of seaweed, and later when Jennifer Torrance, Jennifer Torrance remakes this painting with a bunch of pieces of fabric and ripped up paper. The way that there's kind of it's the way that you're almost like tricking people's eyes into seeing literal things that aren't there. it sort of mirrors the sort of way that you're bringing the metaphor of Jonah and the whale into all these other different situations, but in a very like gentle way. You know, of course this isn't a question. I'm just raving.
As we do on this show.
As we do on this show, unfortunately. This is maybe sort of related to casualness, but also to, I wanted to sort of talk to you a little bit about your practice of playing Wuqing. Yeah, I was close. Yeah, which is a Chinese traditional instrument, and you describe it on your website as traditionally a very solitary practice, as it's a very quiet instrument. And in This Is a Scream, you go into a lot of detail about how you're kind of a quiet person and how you want to scream. And there's a lot of, maybe I'm sort of picking little marbles up from different parts of your pieces, but it seems like you may have, it seems like loudness and softness can mean a lot of things to you. And it made me laugh that this instrument that you play is also very special because it's very quiet. And I was just wondering if you have thoughts about softness and loudness.
Softness and loudness. I think I identify with softness and slowness, and that's sort of where I feel safe and at home. But at this point, I think, I'm trying to grow as a person, and I have, in the last few years, probably made people play loud and fast more often than I used to. I mean, I used to have to work really hard to get a forte into there. Like, it felt like you really had to earn it. And it could take a half an hour to get into and then you also need maybe you need another 10 minutes to come down from it so that nobody will look at the forte. And that's just, I mean, probably partially personality and partially like growing up in the particular immigrant family culture that I did, just trying to be quiet and keep things going. And so softness and loudness. I think the other thing musically that sort of made an imprint was I did this project interviewing improvisers that I played with in Oxford one summer. And I interviewed, it was sort of a group that was a mix of people who were professional and like very established and people who were just students or not, kind of like coming at it from not necessarily having any background in improvising. And I talked to somebody who was like a really established winds player, and I asked him what makes for a great improvisation. And I thought he was going to say something about like what you would hear or the kind of approach or the skill, but what he said was when you can hear the quietest person in the room. And I thought that was just so beautiful, that it's about the relationships, and about making an environment where the person who would have the least power is an equal, that like has a space in that sound world that you're creating together. So I think that's something that I return to, that idea.
Yeah.
It was Pete McPhail. Sorry, I should maybe credit the person who said the beautiful
what
thing.
was the name again?
His name is Pete McPhail.
Yeah. I felt like in the essay too, that Parts to Sing Empty that we talked about earlier, there's a part where you talk about, composition can be a way to imagine new relationships in the world, or creation can be that, and that there are things, I think in the essay you said, like, I'll look it up just to say, there are parts in the world that are unspeakably wrong, and that I can do so little about it that it hurts. Theory does not fix, but it can describe and imagine, and this can connect the smaller parts to the larger, and because all I can access are the small parts, it seems useful to try to connect. And a question I had just about your work in general is like how, I mean, I feel like I relate to this concept a lot of trying to like pull together like all these elements from the world, and these materials that have like, they're pointing out to like things in the world. And I wonder if like how you, because I guess I wonder how you, how or if you feel that as you assemble things, you're kind of calling out to specific like histories or spaces or times. It feels like a lot of the pieces like invite so many different threads in there for the goal of this type of like kind of imagining the world, or trying to pull together a big map of like how a few things are interconnected. So I wonder, if you think that's important to your work, kind of like histories of sound or behaviors or images, and if you're trying to like piece them together for this kind of like critical, theoretical, or imaginative work kind of thing. I know it's a confusing question, but
I was gonna say. What's the question?
I think the histories are definitely there because they're attached to everything. Like you can't really look at anything or listen to anything without its context being there, whether you're aware of it or not.
Right.
And I think often with instrumental music, because it's like an easy kind of small world to kind of look at, I've done a fair number of pieces responding to a particular prompt of an older piece of music, and it's usually something. It's about the person that I'm making it for, so it's usually something that person has a relationship with, or that I can also find a relationship with. So I have a piece for Kier Gogwelt, this a violinist who played this Vesthoff sonata, and so it's sort of focusing in on that particular piece of music and the way that he plays it, and kind of picking out my favorite parts so that I can hear them more, and then kind of connecting them. So that's like an example from a more abstract world. But I guess if we're talking about pieces for people moving around, or non-instrumental music, I would say I think maybe I think about the people that are going to be doing it first, and then the space that they'll be doing it in second, and if there are histories relating to that, I try to make myself more aware of them. But I wouldn't say, I don't know if it's necessarily like a beautiful edifice that's built of all of these perfect histories assembled in a way that, logically makes sense, and that leads to lesser injustice in the world, because it definitely doesn't. It's just that histories are a part of us and a part of everything that we touch and think about. So, I guess that's as much as I can say generally.
Yeah.
have just a little bit more time before we take a break. And I'm very curious about your practice playing Guqin.
Guqin.
Trying. And, being someone myself who has started new instruments and like new practices, sort of, what feels like late, I was curious, sort of, how you would describe how you got into playing this instrument and playing something that was, has this tradition of being for personal meditation, which is very much not like if you're doing classical piano, which is much for the product of the performance.
Yeah. So I grew up playing piano and clarinet, and I think always interested in Chinese music, but there wasn't a lot of avenues that I knew for learning. In my undergrad, like at my last year at Stanford, they started a Guzheng class, which is the larger version of this zither. So it's got a resonating body, and it's louder, and it has bridges, so it's way easier to tune and play. And it was really fun. And actually, if they had had one of those at UCSD, I would have taken it, but they just didn't. And I wasn't necessarily planning on learning it. I TA'd for Music of Asia and Oceania my very first quarter, and one of the first lectures was by Alex Khalil, who was a musicologist who was then a grad student at UCSD, but he had gone to China to study stone bells and then ended up learning the Guqin and returning multiple times. And he started a Guqin club. So it was just like here was this willing teacher who was super open and like really generous with just sharing what he knew about this instrument. And then later on, I did a Fulbright and went to China to study. But it was just because I ran into Alex that I picked it up. Yeah. And I think so it is one of these Chinese arts of self-cultivation for like a literate person. So I think you have like calligraphy and brush painting and guqin and like go. I don't know if like Qi or Tai Chi are part of it, but it's all these kinds of things that they're made to be amateur pursuits that better the person, that kind of like still your spirit and teach you patience, that like you do in your old age to prolong your life and to enjoy it. And that culture of, I mean, it's a lower pressure culture than like learning Western classical music in a conservatory or something. Yeah. So it's very easy to kind of to get into.
Let's watch a little clip before we take our break. This is from a piece that I'm pulling up the one Guqin Forest. Who are you working with there?
This is Ambles Goose, who's an electronic musician based in Scotland.
I love all the string finger noises.
Yeah, there's a lot of that that's a kind of a natural part of the traditional culture, I guess. That it's not really extended technique, it's just like the original technique. But I guess it's funny because it's all built around the fact that it doesn't project pitch for that long. So it's sort of like a technical limitation of the instrument, but then there are all these layers of culture and myth and kind of storytelling around why that's more meaningful than if you could just hear what you played.
But if it's also, you know, kind of music for yourself, it's the fact that, like, I find it very beautiful that it seems to be built around the things that are audible just to you, you know. Unless you do a bunch of miking. Like, but,
Yeah.
why don't we take a break and then we'll be back to talk about the Netflix documentary Skyladder.
Okay, and we're back. We are now ready to talk about Skyladder, which maybe we have a trailer we can show.
Yeah.
To set the stage.
Contemporary artists are playing on the big stage. I remember hearing about the explosion events and thinking, that guy really nailed it.
Psy's first really big show, this combination of space and scale and invention, I saw it. It was clear to me that Psy had arrived. That was the moment.
To say that the Chinese artist Psy Kuo-shang has exploded onto the contemporary art scene is no exaggeration.
He is really turning the idea of what art is on its head. And if you go as far as him, how do you challenge yourself?
是的，天梯是最难实现的项目。ぜひここで地球から宇宙に向かってはしごを作っていきたいと思います。
这个梯子要做多高啊
500米高。
500米高，
半公里。
Early work has begun on the largest single installation ever commissioned.
His work does have a strong subtext. He is trying to do art with integrity.
奶奶的渔村是我想象天梯的地方。我在寻找跟看不见的力量的关系，因为已经挑战了第4次。有看到无？老妈，你看到无？连水拿砍难哦。
All grandmas.
Yeah, she like watches from an iPad, I think.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point. It's like to show your grandma on the iPad. Like that's the main reason to do it.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of fun watching this. I don't know about Daniel, but why did you want us to watch this?
I found it so moving. I mean, there are a couple like personal things that really, so my family is from Taiwan, so I didn't learn Taiwanese, but it's the same as the dialect that he's speaking. He's from like Quanzhou, and I don't know, but my dad said probably my ancestors were poor people from Quanzhou. That's why like they went to this island, because if they were rich, they wouldn't have gone. But it's the same dialect, and so I don't know that language that he's speaking with his family, but it's so familiar. It feels like home to me. And also, Mandarin in a way is like that, but I can understand it. But Taiwanese is like the language that feels like home that I can't even speak. So those are just like purely personal, like kind of tugging at my heartstrings kinds of things, like when he's talking to his family. But I guess from the perspective of a person who works in the invisible most of the time, it's like the fantasy of having your work be legible, right? And like you see the pitfalls of that when they go into how, unavoidably he's incredibly successful, and so he's getting these big commissions, and so of course the work is commercial because he has to figure out how to spend a couple $1 million in budget and in a way that fits what people are asking of him. But this is
literally the Chinese government.
Yeah. But this project is like the failed one, it's like the 4 failures are so I mean, so heartwarming to see. I don't know, why is it so nice to see other people say, because you know he's really successful and it's called Skyladder, so he's gonna make it in the end.
Right.
But it's just so relatable. Like you see the young him and all this footage being like, it's gonna look like that, like making the big explosion gesture and looking at the sky and all the diagrams and like failure after failure after failure. It's I don't know, it's just very inspiring, and like seeing the way he built this project kind of with people in this particular community, and really, I guess it goes back to this idea of like private viewing, or the kind of intimacy of this, because it's a fireworks show, but it's a private fireworks show, and it has to be secret, and it's like it's his version of that inaudible music, right? And it's just for his grandma who's turning 100. So like how much more like familial, like familially pious could you get?
Yeah. So just to sort of, explain if people were listening without watching the trailer with subtitles, he has this project that he said fails 4 times over his life, and in the last attempt, I guess this was in the trailer. It's this huge operation that was not not officially cleared, through the government, and so that's why it kind of had to be secret. It could not be, it couldn't be advertised for like the large, huge following that he would usually get from series. And there's actually like, I love the way that you put it, about this sort of, this personal project and this sort of, being all to show his grandmother. But at the same time, there's an interview with his wife at some point near to the end of the film where she's like, we're just burning money. No one's going to see it. And I found that honestly like a little sinister. Like her stress was so real. And even the film itself ends with like everything's gone off well, and she's just like leaning against a light post, just really sobbing. And I was like, oh, she's in trouble. Like that, I definitely felt for her, but it's. I feel like by the end of the film, I had a little bit less of a sense of him, actually. Maybe because of the complexity of how he talked about his work with the Chinese government, and the sort of opportunities and pitfalls that had. But there's footage of display, this large display that was mostly those like colored powders, that I definitely got weepy about, just because, like you said, like it's so legible, even if it's not words, it's the color and the impact and the way that even at one moment there's sort of an ecological disaster aspect to it. The combination of seeing something that truly looks like smoke, and then through that smoke seeing these spikes of green that end in this pink. It's like, oh, those are flowers. I think I actually said that out loud. I was like, oh, they're flowers.
Yeah, it's very. I just like, cause I think at some point they talk about how there's like computer chips in some of them that will like push out or like explode certain parts, and it made me, especially that flower part, was like, wow, how is this working? Like, because it's like a green stem there's a white, so it's a green like smoke stem, then there's this white circle, and then there's the red flower. So it really like depicts a flower in a way that's like seems really technical to make that process happen like in real time, and then it's gonna float away into like a mass of color.
Yeah, especially when you're used to like 4th of July here, where there's just like, if you're lucky, there's like a shitty smiley face.
But always the smoke afterward. Like,
yeah, seeing the layers in that particular piece was really cool, and I think that there's something a little sinister about that too. Just that it doesn't disappear. You know, it's this super transient thing, but you see the colors bleed over into the next round, and then when you zoom out, you see just like how it's kind of drifting over the harbor.
Yeah.
Everything is kind of like over, like writing over that history, but the history is kind of still there.
Yeah. And we're so drawn to the spectacle of like what in my mind still is like a very violent thing of like exploding. And the light that comes out of that, and now these like smoky, like colored smoke. But I remember watching one of them and just the camera stays on the smoke as it starts to like ripple into something new, and I think in that way he did direct me toward this idea of aftermath, or concept of like after the spectacle, what comes out of that, and what do we do with what should be done, or what has to happen because of one event that happened before. Yeah, I don't know, just another layer to it, this like wreckage that comes after the fact.
Yeah, I mean, it's good that, you know, he talks about how they used all biodegradable powders for it, you know, but it's still imagining that giant cloud of colored dust sort of just drifting on shore, you know, like, it may be biodegradable, but like, you know, people are going to be breathing that for a little bit, and I'm not saying like, oh, like, you know, he should know, but they're like, there's something about the weight of the material afterwards still existing. That's really emotional.
Yeah, at times sorry.
Sorry, no, go on. I haven't talked to you.
No, just at times it's so dense that you can't see, like the amount of haze that it creates, that the new explosions that are happening are just kind of like barely there inside this really dense haze. So it's making this visual spectacle, but it's also obscuring it at the same time.
Yeah, I know. We had another one in the video, or the show, I remember that was like they were all coming out of a house, like one small house, and I thought that was just a really funny image. I think it was in Berlin or something, but just really funny, like all this smoke and like, you know, like the drama of the house, like being displayed.
Torn to shreds. Yeah. You know, that one was like, again, also kind of emotional for me, even though it was sort of ridiculous looking. But also, I think because of the way that it was, the moment that it was brought into the narrative of the documentary. Thinking about family conflict or something like that. What do we think about his explosion paintings?
I mean, in a way, it's very much in the tradition of brush painting and calligraphy, right? This art form that's like music. It's transient, and it's a time-based improvisation. And like the idea with calligraphy is that you can't redo. Like with ink, there's no like whiteout or like painting over. It's just like that mark is that motion of your hand, and it's just indelibly there. So it's like a mirror unto whatever your emotional state is at the time. And I mean, I've heard people say this about like knitting and stuff too, that you can kind of look at the weft or and see like how focused or how distracted, how tired you are. But it's just like a kind of, it's a spectacular way of making that performance-based aspect of it visible. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a part that just reminded me of where there's like a cameo by Steven Spielberg who like comes in and says, so how many times does it take to make these paintings with gunpowder? And the assistant's like, one time. Like, it was interesting because another thing that Sai says later on is like the like duality of East-West is kind of annoying to him, but I felt like in that moment it was like this real like duality or clash there of like Spielberg, who probably, you know, creating films, it's like tons and tons of takes, whereas this other form of like the gunpowder thing is like one and done, you know. Yeah. And it takes a lot of preparation, so it's not that it is maybe less time consuming, but this act is very quick that occurs where everything explodes. So
I also love the clips of him and all of the clips of him lighting these things and having an explosion goes off, and just like the sheer glee. Like, you would think that would be a more like, okay, here we go, like, it's the only chance we get, but he's so into explosions.
Yeah. And he actually, that's reminding me, he says something in here that related to what you were saying earlier, Carolyn. But he said, I was looking for an energy, the kind that would disrupt my art. And it made me think that it must be so, like, such an exciting discovery to have this new medium that you then can really, it disrupts the way you were expressing yourself in the medium. But you can still kind of like use some of what you had learned or the trajectories you already had. But finding that disruption creates a ton of energy and actually like can propel you towards something very special.
For me, it was interesting to see the arc of his career, and like those early pieces that are kind of where he's holding an explosion in his hand over a nuclear detonation site. I found really moving. It's just like it's one person, and you know, like holding in your hand this reference to this kind of horrific, like enormous thing, and those like it feels very personal and like, you know, like has the kind of like grit of early performance art, and then they go on to show the stuff that has like a bigger budget, and most of the stuff in that trailer was like stuff that had a budget, definitely.
Like the opening of the was it 2008 Asian Olympics?
Yeah. And I guess this idea of kind of returning, they show him kind of talking to a lesser known artist who has the studio full of these figures, like they're the kind of molded clay animals that he's like kind of working at therapeutically and somewhat obsessively after the death of his wife. And they ask him like, what do you get out of working with these with lesser known artists? And he said something about how like there's this spark of like necessity or something that is easy to lose, and it's very easy to see that. And also like with the talking heads kind of diagnosing like, oh, he's trying to spend $1 million. That's why it's like not as powerful.
Yeah.
But then to this gesture, of like looking for the personal and pouring your own personal savings into, like at the peak of your career, what that enables you to do is to spend all of this money, and all of this energy that's not necessarily I mean, I'm sure he was compensated in other ways, and he's got this documentary.
Sure. I was gonna say.
Yeah. They're making. That was the conversation after between his wife. Was like, we've got to make the money back. Let's do a documentary.
I mean, and you know, I would definitely recommend this. The visual of the sky ladder was pretty freaking breathtaking. Like just how high it went, you know, and I think it was really emotional for me to watch it sort of start burning out from the bottom. It's like this beautiful message of like this mystical one chance up there. It's like when the path is being destroyed after you. It's like, you know, see why he kept trying to do it.
I think also in Chinese culture, I think they didn't really talk about this as much. He said it's to connect our world to the universe, but it's also this mythical thing. Like, it's not, a sky ladder isn't like this random object that he invented. It's part of the history of mythology about like connecting our worlds to the immortal worlds and like the eternal worlds, and like connecting like whatever is earthly to the eternal, and so I just thought it was like a really beautiful like instantiation of that, like making that literal for his grandmother. And yeah, just like, because we don't really talk about audience in new music as much. It's just sort of written out of the picture that we're making things for people, and this action of like so explicitly making it for someone and for your family, like everybody there was family. Was
an extended family. Yeah. That's maybe a good little spot to wrap up. You know, it's very fun to talk to you. I miss seeing you around at concerts.
Yeah,
and hearing your stuff in concerts. I'm sure that'll, you know,
we'll see each other soon.
Yeah.
They're happening again. It was great to talk with both of you.
Yeah. Thanks again for coming. I don't know when we'll do it again. I think our next show is 2 weeks. Yeah. So we'll say something when we know what we're doing.
A silly promo video.
Cool. All right.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you so much.